This tablet is taken from the ruins of the Library of Ashburnipal, which was destroyed in 612 BC. Despite being less famous than the Library of Alexandria, the Library of Ashburnipal is both older and it's given us more, as around 10,000 ancient tablets have been recovered from its remains. This particular tablet is of importance to us, as it refers to the festival of Akitu, one of the earliest New Year festivals that we know of. First mentioned in the city of in the Pharaoh period around the middle of the 3rd millennium, the festival eventually spread out, being adopted by surrounding cities like Nippur, Adab and Uruk, although it was celebrated slightly differently in each location as the locals put an emphasis on their own gods. It was celebrated twice a year, first on the autumn and then on the spring equinoxes, which marked the beginning of a new 6-month equinox year. The most important part of the celebrations were the procession out of, and eventually back into, the city by the city's chief deity, Nana, the moon in the case of This was a celebration of the triumph of Nana, who, especially in the autumn equinox, would triumph over the sun, Utu, spending longer in the sky. In Babylon, it was accompanied by the reading of the Enuma Elis to the god Marduk, who was believed to spend the 11-day festival battling the forces of chaos so that the world could be renewed again. There, the king would ritually give up the symbols of his power and humble himself before Marduk in the Essigil. The priest would then give him back his royal insignia. It is possible that a mock king was also crowned, who would eventually be ritually sacrificed before the end of the festival, so he could assist Marduk in his fight against the forces of chaos, although this has been heavily disputed by scholars. The Akitu New Year festivals were celebrated from the 3rd to the 1st millennium BC, and the Roman emperor Elagabalus, who had once been head priest to the sun god Elagabal, briefly encouraged the celebration of a ceremony largely agreed to have been inspired by the Akitu celebrations. Despite its age, the Akitu festival is not the oldest New Year festival we have evidence of. The ancient Egyptians celebrated a number of New Year's festivals over their long period of dominance, partially because traditions changed as time went on, and partially because of their use of 3 separate calendars. There was the wepet-renpet, the first day of the civil calendar, the Neheb-Kau festival, which celebrated the rebirth of Osiris, the Peret-Sepdet, which signified the rebirth of Sirius as it reappeared in the night sky after an absence of 70 days, and the Sed or Hebsed festival, which occurred only after the pharaoh had reigned for 30 years, and it was then carried out once every 3 years after that. Of these, the oldest is the Sed festival, which is believed to have been pre-dynastic, taking it back before the 4th millennium and into the mists of prehistory. The earliest certain evidence for it is from the tomb of the 1st dynasty pharaoh Den in Abydos, where Den is depicted crossing the field, an important part of the Sed festival where the pharaoh had to dance or run across a field in the direction of each of the 4 winds, first wearing the crown of northern Egypt and then wearing the crown of southern Egypt. Doing so would symbolically dedicate Egypt to the gods and assert the pharaoh's authority over the land. But the most important part of the ceremony was the sitting of the thrones, where the pharaoh would sit first on the throne of northern Egypt and then on the throne of southern Egypt. The Sed festival was important, as it was seen as a renewal of the pharaoh's potency and a rejuvenation of their rulership. However, as time moved on, other New Year's festivals came to the fore, and gifts became a big part of them. In the tomb of Januna, the pharaoh was displayed as receiving gifts at the start of the civil new year, many of which would have been given to officials as marks of royal favour. During both the wepet-renpet and the Neheb-Kau festival, tombs were lit in the Theban necropolis, and the festivities were celebrated by banqueting in the tomb chamber, and by the bringing of offerings and bouquets by family members and friends. So, the Mesopotamian and ancient Egyptian New Year festivals are some of the oldest that we know about, and we can see beyond doubt that celebrating the New Year absolutely did not originate in the modern world or with Christianity. But the Mesopotamian and ancient Egyptian religions are not usually exactly what people mean when they talk about paganism. So, let's go forward now and look at the New Year festivals of pagan Europe. Here we could probably start and end with the 567 AD Council of Tours, whose Canon 22 states, "Some still hold fast the old error that they should honour the 1st of January. Others, on the festival of the Sea of Peter, present meat offerings to the dead and partake of meats which have been offered to demons. Others revere certain rocks or trees or fountains, etc. The priests should root out these heathenish superstitions." Here the Church Fathers are admonishing pagans for celebrating New Year's on January the 1st. It's not clear if the activities they discuss are being done by pagans on January the 1st, or on the festival of the Sea of Peter, which was on January the 18th. But we can learn more about pagan celebrations of New Year's from the Church's repeated attempts to stop them from doing so. From the Synod of Uxia during the late 6th century, we find the following activity censured: New Year's Day mummers disguised as stags or young female animals. We get more detail about this custom from the historian Rudolf Arbsmann discussing the censuring of pagans by Caesarius of Arles on New Year's Day. From the context in both sermons, it is quite clear that Caesarius refers to the somewhat disorderly New Year's Day masquerade at which the participants, wearing grotesque masks, roam for sport through the streets of towns and villages. Our sources throw no light whatsoever on the initial significance of the beast mimicry of the calends of January. Its origin was buried in oblivion, both for those who objected to it and for those who practiced it. However, a number of monumental remains from Roman Gaul leave no doubt that the stag figured prominently in the religious thought and ritual of the Celts. So Arnold and Nilsson have independently suggested that the custom of cavulum facere, dressing up as stags, which troubled Caesarius and other leading churchmen, was a survival of the cult which had once been paid to the old stag-horned Celtic god Cernunnos. About 30 representations of this god are known, some in stone, some in bronze. A partly damaged yet awe-inspiring head of the bearded god, crowned with antlers from which torques are suspended, was discovered on the remains of a Celtic altar beneath the Cathedral of Notre Dame de Paris in 1711. If I was feeling poetic, I'd say that the discovery of the statue of a pagan god under one of the most monumental landmarks of the Christian world is a fitting metaphor here. We may not know for certain the origins of the pagan New Year's stag masquerade, but it being a leftover of the cult of the pagan stag god Cernunnos isn't a bad guess. On another note, we do have a New Year's Day sermon from St. Augustine that is quite explicit about the New Year's activities of pagans at Hippo in Roman Africa. Are you going to take part in the New Year's Day celebrations? Are you, just like a pagan, going to play dice and become intoxicated? They seek pleasure in dissolute songs. They run to the theatre. The demons are pleased with deceptive songs, with worthless shows, with the varied foulness of the theatre, with the frenzy of the circus, with the cruelty of the amphitheatre. Apart from the amphitheatre, Augustine could almost be talking to a modern audience. There's no beast mimicry here, just getting drunk, playing games and singing. Similarly in the East, St. John Chrysostom, discussing the New Year celebrations of the Antiochians, denounced the all-night devilish celebrations which are going on today, the tauntings, the invectives, the night-long dances, the ridiculous comedy. Again, it sounds more like what we used to. Later in the medieval period, and originating in medieval France, January the 1st saw the Feast of Fools. What did this involve? Well, it involved gambling, cross-dressing, and getting drunk. Stunningly, the church wasn't too keen on this, and in 1445 the Theological Faculty of Paris addressed a letter to the bishops of France condemning the feast. Priests and clerks may be seen wearing masks and monstrous visages at the hours of office. They dance in the choir dressed as women, pandas or minstrels. They sing wanton songs. They eat black pudding at the horn of the altar while the celebrant is saying mass. They play at dice there. They cense with stinking smoke from the soles of old shoes. They run and leap through the church without a blush at their own shame. Finally, they drive about the town and its theatres in shabby traps and carts, and rouse the laughter of their fellows and the bystanders in infamous performances with indecent gestures and verses, scurrilous and unchaste. The feast was first mentioned in the 11th century, and academics largely agree that it has pagan origins, sharing much in common with the pagan Roman New Year festival of Saturnalia, showing the continuity of pagan New Year celebrations well into the medieval period. The Feast of Fools died out in the 16th century, but the early modern era still marked the New Year with gift-giving and even New Year's resolutions. In 1621, Nehemiah Wallington wrote, "As I lay in my bed, I did purpose on New Year's Day to begin a new life." Writing 8 years later, Nehemiah seems to admit that he didn't quite manage to succeed in his resolution. Despite the 400 years of separation, I'm sure both us and him can sympathise with the 6th of January 1883 edition of the Worcester Journal, which points out that it unfortunately happens that New Year's Day resolutions are often of the most transitory kind, and they pass away almost with the mists of the morning on which they are formed. And so the celebration of New Year's in various forms is so old it is not even ancient, stretching back even further into the mists of prehistory. And although many traditions have been lost, few of us dress up in stag costumes nowadays, many customs, New Year's games, and of course drunken revelry, remain with us to this day. Are there any New Year's customs you'd like to bring back? Why not tell me in a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to see future videos. A shout out to my patrons who help me make higher quality videos. If you'd like to support the channel, see videos sooner, and join our community Discord, check out my Patreon, linked in the description below. I'll see you next time.